Saxon Algebra 1, Lesson 9. In this lesson, we will discuss the rules for multiplication of signed numbers, we will discuss inverse operations, and the rules for division of signed numbers. The sum of 3 2s is 6. The sum of 2 3s is also 6. Multiplication by a whole number is shorthand for repeated addition. So in the first case, we have 3 times 2 equals 6, and in the second case, we have 2 times 3 equals 6. In other words, 3 times 2 is the same numeral as 2 times 3. Using a number line, the sum of 3 2s is 6. And the sum of 2 3s is also 6. Now let's obtain the product of 2 and negative 3 on the number line. This is the same as adding 2 negative 3s. We get negative 6. We see that negative 3 plus negative 3 equals negative 6, so 2 times negative 3 is equal to negative 6. But if we attempt to use the number line to show negative 3 times 2 by drawing negative 3 arrows that are 2 units long, we find that the task is impossible. We just don't know how to draw a negative number of anything. The number line was a useful graphic aid in understanding the concept of signed numbers and their algebraic addition, but is of less help when discussing the multiplication or division of signed numbers, so we will not use it further for this purpose. Instead, we will state the rules for multiplication and division of signed numbers and show some examples. There are basically 2 rules. Rule 1. The product of 2 numbers having opposite signs is a negative number. Rule 2. The product of 2 numbers having the same sign is a positive number. To say it another way, a negative times a positive is always a negative, and a positive times a negative is always a negative. Whereas when you're multiplying, 2 negatives is always a positive. Here are some examples. Negative 5 times 7 is negative 35 because opposite signs produce a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. Negative 5 times negative 7 is positive 35 because the same signs produce a positive. 2 negatives multiply to a positive. Positive 4 times positive 3 is positive 12. Again, same signs produce a positive. Positive 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. Opposite signs produce a negative. A positive times a negative is a negative. Negative 6 times negative 2 is positive 12. Same signs produce a positive, or a negative times a negative is a positive. An important observation: when adding, two negatives produce a bigger negative. When multiplying, two negatives produce a positive. For example, -5 plus -3 is -8, whereas -5 times -3 is +15. When adding, a negative and a positive can produce either a smaller positive or a smaller negative. For example, -5 and +3 add to -2, and -4 and +7 add to +3. When multiplying, a negative and a positive will always produce a negative. -5 times +3 is -15. +7 times -4 is -28. Inverse operations. If one operation will undo another operation, the two operations are called inverse operations. If we take a particular number and then add and subtract another number, the result is the number we started with. For example, if we begin with the number 7 and then add and subtract 3, we end up with 7. So addition and subtraction are inverse operations. Multiplication and division are also inverse operations. If we multiply 7 by 2 and then divide the result by 2, we end up with 7. There has been no change since dividing by 2 undoes multiplying by 2. Since multiplication and division are inverse operations, the rules for multiplying signed numbers carry over to the rules for dividing signed numbers. The quotient of two numbers with opposite signs is always a negative number. The quotient of two numbers with the same sign is always a positive number. Some examples. 15 over 3 is 15 divided by 3. That's +5. A positive divided by a positive is a positive. -8 over -2. -8 divided by -2 is +4. A negative divided by a negative is a positive. Same signs give a positive. 12 over -3, 12 divided by -3 is -4. Opposite signs give a negative. A positive divided by a negative is a negative. -18 over 3 is -6. Again, a negative divided by a positive is a negative. Opposite signs, when divided, produce a negative. This is the end of Lesson 9. Your assignment is Problem Set 9 on pages 45 and 46 of your book.